Sorry, I was listening to Mark the DJ. That was pretty cool. I'm, I missed part of the API. How you got to set the API up. I caught that second part because I went and grabbed some lunch real quick. So I'll have some questions, but it looked pretty cool. The Redis is that's the Redis and the tests are really cool. So I did catch those. Very cool. Y'all are going fast.
Some of us haven't seen this whole thing integrated yet. Like you're building these features, and then one of the things that we're doing with this quirky show that that you've joined us for is
Yeah.
a really interesting opportunity for us to kind of like take a second and kind of
Huddle. This
Yeah,
is what we
like-
have right now. This is what we can present. It's kind of an
a snapshot.
Yeah, an
of-
extreme demo day in a
Yeah.
way. In a way.
Yeah. Other than that, I don't know that we have too many people watching this, or we're trying to figure out what it.
I'm gonna tell y'all we're live, just so you know.
So hi Eric, what's up?
Yeah. Hey, how's it going? I just checked the Twitch feed. I'm like, oh, hey, my face is big there. So, yeah, there we are. So, how's everybody?
Very good, very good. It's really fun to have you here. Thanks for joining. We're just hanging out the other couple of weeks ago in your real show.
We, it's off air now. I've been kicked off. No, I'm just kidding. I only had those 6 episodes, but yeah, we got to hang out. I was super thrilled to talk about Wing. And I know we'll probably talk more about this, but I love what y'all are doing. Obviously serverless. If this were building containers or EC2, this would be an entirely different conversation, and I wouldn't be smiling. I would be, But although those would be, obviously containers, Fargate, things like that are going to be interesting to see how you implement that, and I think you should.
Definitely.
But I love the idea of making it easier for developers to build serverless. The mind shift, because you hear people talk, and I'll try not to go too long because all you said was how are you doing, but the mind shift of building to serverless is not just an architectural change. It's a you have to change the way you think, and so by making that easier, I love it that y'all are doing that. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's all coming from the same place, right? Like I've been at AWS and built some serverless stuff, and the CDK was a result of that pain. And
Built a thing.
Yeah, built a thing, and that's where we met. And I was actually thinking that I don't know too much about your story, so we were just talking that maybe it would be kind of interesting to hear about your journey.
Yeah, it's pretty much like any other developer, pretty much the same. So,
Okay.
I don't know how far you want me to go back, but yeah, I'll. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona. No, I won't go that far back. But which, having been to Israel, looks a lot like Israel as well. But just same kind of climate, desert, things like that.
Right.
We just don't have like the huge Mediterranean there. So
Camels
that's
everywhere.
Camels everywhere, exactly. Yes. So I tell you, I started doing tech. I've always kind of done it on the side. I remember, and I made this joke here a while back, but I was around when they introduced tables into HTML. I'm thinking, man, that is the coolest thing ever. I remember the blank tag, those kinds of things. But I had kind of gotten into it. I was working as a day operator at a financial institution, and I ran. Let's see how old y'all are. I ran AS400s.
AS400. Do you know what
That's
it
a
is?
mainframe, right?
It's a mainframe.
It is. It's an IBM mainframe,
See, I'm old
still
enough.
in use.
Still in use.
Yes, you are.
in
Yeah,
use,
you're
yeah.
right. So I know you're old enough because we both shaved behind the bald and gray hair. Yeah,
Shaved
exactly.
our
So
age.
that's right, exactly. But then I was studying. This is something a lot of people don't know. My background is actually theology. I've studied for a master's of divinity at seminary, and so that's where the speaking comes from. I used to speak every weekend, and I was more focused on youth and college and those things like that. But again, I always did tech on the side. It's kind of funny. Every church I ever worked at, the minute, like anywhere else, the minute they find out you do tech, it's like, oh, hey, you're going to put a website, you're going to get a file server working, you're going to manage the email. And so I've done all of that. But as you know, or as I've said before, I have 5 kids.
Yeah.
And so I had to step down. It was just no dramatic story of, I'm mad and leaving the church, anything like that. I'm actually still very involved in my church and love it. And but then I decided to kind of make a run for tech, as a full-time job. And so the first job I ever got full-time tech was I was a designer.
Oh, really?
And I was I was horrible.
Like a visual,
I knew
a
the
visual,
tools.
a visual
Like-
designer.
Wow.
Visual UX designer. I was hired on as a company. Did the HTML, built the front ends as well,
Got
but
it.
mainly I was the designer. And
And
we
then
had
they,
a- we had
and
a
then they
rock
told
star.
you can't design everything with HTML tables.
Yeah.
Yeah, but more than once, and you can actually.
And you
That's a big
can.
fat
I
lie.
agree. I
So,
agree.
yeah. So
I
exactly.
still,
yeah.
this is basically my level of HTML layout.
I'm moving between absolute and I'm still static, absolute, and relative.
tables.
And relative. I mean, flex is out of
Yeah,
my.
and see, you say something like flex, and I
yeah.
just,
No, exactly.
I was trying to
exactly.
build something the other day.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank God for ChatGPT. I mean, really honestly, it's the only way I'm ever going to get
Yeah.
something right. But so it'd be interesting here is I was designing for him, and then our developer left. He quit. And so they asked me, what do we need? I said, you need to go out and find a rock star developer. We were doing .NET, C# at the time.
Okay.
And we were doing, Razor backend. It's again dating myself and or templates, and so they went out, and I was on vacation, and they went out and they hired a rock star designer, and I was like, and they called me and said, "Hey, you're the new developer."
I
Nice.
see.
So that's when I learned to develop, and so I crash coursed in C#, in HTML, CSS, all those things, and did that for quite a while. But I fell in love with the back end. I really did. I fell in love with building that. Not necessarily C#, although I actually really like C#. It's very
Yeah,
powerful.
it's an amazing language.
Just ran over my head most of the time. I really like the non-compiled, Node or Python, that kind of thing. But I was doing that for a long time. I've been a software architect. I've worked for the startups. I've done the quintessential failed startup, and so that's great for me, and so it's good learning lesson. My wife loved that. Hope we do that again, and so I ended up doing. I ended up getting into working different jobs, but I missed the speaking. I really missed it. So I kind of found I worked for Rackspace for a while as their AWS evangelist for
Okay.
Rackspace, and that was a blend of speaking and tech. It was a beautiful blend. I really liked it. But then that's when I heard of serverless. I was, when the day they announced serverless, I remember staring at the screen and go, I don't know why you do it any other way. And so I started. And here's the problem with serverless. You can't no, it's better now. There's tons of things, but there's monetizing serverless as an infrastructure company becomes problematic because developers quickly go, I got this. I have the CDK. I have the same. I don't, and so when they would have me come in and talk to customers, like, you could do this on serverless a lot easier. and they were very customer first companies. So it'd be like, that's great here. Maybe not always go to serverless, right? But it made, a lot of sense. So when Chris Munns opened up the spot for my current position, I went for it, and that's kind of that's the shorter, believe it or not, that's the abridged version of my journey to where I'm at.
And
now.
how long have you been at AWS?
5 years in
5
October.
years.
I get my orange badge in October. Yeah.
Okay.
How long were you at AWS?
7 years.
Oh, 7 years.
When I
Wow.
left, I was like, I've been here for 5 years. And then after I left, I calculated.
Really?
And I realized I was there for 7 years.
Yeah.
And something was like, wait.
Nice.
So I was like, time flies. It was a great journey. I really enjoyed it. And it's such a
it's a good company to
dynamic
work for.
and dynamic environment. I worked for Microsoft before.
Okay.
But AWS was very different energy, lots of creativity, lots of innovation, lots of customer, interaction, especially with open source and the CDK and
Yeah.
um,
And that's it's funny because we say this, and I'm not trying to do a pitch for AWS on this, but or I am either way. But it's interesting. They say, and Elad, you probably back me up on this. So much of what we build is customer driven, because whoa, that's a pain point. Let's see if we can't, and so much of what we build is customer driven, and I love that. I absolutely love it. So,
agreed. So did you think of did you have some time to think about Wing Lang after our conversation?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I'll be very honest. I love Wing. I love the idea. Obviously, y'all were on the show. We had several others. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but we had Amped on the show. I love the space. I think it's everybody knows me as the Sam guy. I have literally only one now, but for a long time I had 2 squirrel costumes in our closet. Long story on why I have 2, and I can get my wife down here.
I don't want to know.
I'm not sure.
It's probably best not to. But I will tell you, the last Halloween. Last Halloween, we went as Mr. and Mrs. Squirrel for
really?
with our kids.
Wow.
So because we had both. But everybody, and I love Sam. The way Sam works, the way CDK works, I feel it's really good. So I'm never down on Sam. But I love where this is headed. And Elad, you and I have talked about this a lot, and I think you said it, or no, Eyal, I think you coined it. And now I'm using my American accent, so I'm sure I said your name wrong.
Yeah, said it perfectly.
Said it pretty good. Said it pretty good, man.
Well, I am, I'm multicultural, but it's all my Hebrew training. So, I love the idea, and I actually just tweeted a little. It's like monolithic in multi or microservice EDA distributed application out. Yeah, right. And I think that's where. And I know I've heard you say this, and I've said the same thing. And the idea of distributed apps are hard in general. Right. I think AWS has done a phenomenal job of making distributed apps graspable, reachable, doable by the common developer, and not, you don't have to be the only 3 of people in the world understand it. Right. So I think we've done a great job. But part of that, there's a learning curve in understanding how much of the architecture takes over time, and how many times am I leaving the code to set up the architecture? And so there's a knowledge, again, like I said, there's a learning curve in going, okay, where does the code stop? Where does the architecture start, or vice versa? Right. And what y'all are doing in this space, whether y'all, Amped, Clotho, I think there's several now that are coming out. Right. You're saying, we want to keep it in code, but not lose the advantage of what we're taking on serverless. Right. I know there are some folks who go, it's hard. I'm just going to go back to a container, or I'm going to go back to an EC2. Yeah. And that's not the right answer, right? So we kind need to get where we go.
It's kind of like giving up, right? Yeah. And saying, we fail. Yeah. We're failing with the at the design time, so we're going to pay at runtime, right?
Yeah. And some of that is, if developing were easy, everybody would do it, right? There is, and we love to bring it and make it easier, and no code, low code, and all those things. But there has to be, there's for instance, when I describe step functions in like the Workflow Studio, which is phenomenal, right? The Workflow Studio is amazing. And we actually took this all over the Middle East. And so I had people coming up, so I don't even need to be a developer, right? It's like, yeah, you still need to be a developer. You still need to have an understanding of workflows and code and scaling and all those things. And that doesn't change with Wing or this space. But it makes it brings that ability to build it into a single place, single screen, and kind of lets the head kind of watch it linearly, Right.
Yeah.
So,
and I think I think it's a lot about the tooling, right? Like I feel like having a single compiler that has the full picture is the foundation of the solution. At least in our in how Wing is approaching it. It's like the idea of a compiler is to take different pieces of your application and link them together in a strongly typed, in a strong way.
I mean, I think that's, but we are also standing on the shoulder of giants. We also have I mean, we rely on OpenTelemetry for distributed tracing to make sure that all those pieces talk together in a way that is comparison. We need OpenTelemetry. And the fact that we can have a counter that's based on DynamoDB,
Of course.
we need DynamoDB for this. So the compiler is what wraps all of that. I mean, the fact that the language is open source and the ecosystem is open allows you to basically kind of use the entire ecosystem.
Yeah.
And the compiler is kind of the...
Which is true, by the way, for any compiler, and,
Right,
you know,
right.
in any scenario, right? Like when a compiler has an atomic counter in your operating system,
Right.
it uses the CPU's capability to
Exactly.
implement an atomic counter. It's not implementing the atomic counter in the language, right?
Right.
So it's all about creating the right layer of abstraction that you can build in a safe way, right? And make sure that you can like find all the problems as early as possible, but then enjoy the distributed nature of the system. And
Awesome.
So I'm sorry, I got all excited. So
That's a good one.
normally, and here's my take on compilers, or not compilers. Let's say emulator. Okay, so because I know y'all have an emulator compiler and an emulator runs locally. Normally, and there are several presentations in the wild where I'm like, do not use emulators, or that's not what I'm saying. I don't prefer emulators, which in my head I'm saying do not use emulators, right? But in my head, however, so SAM, we have an emulator, right? We run SAM local, and in fact, just a little SAM plug for those of you who don't know, we just made it so that you can do the custom authorizer. You can actually use custom authorizer in local SAM to test your authorization, which has been a big ask. So thank you for giving me 7 seconds of your show to do that plug. But yeah, and there's no stopping me now. So what was that? But the idea for me, the idea of an emulator. And your compiler emulator is all kind of built in, or it's not the same, but it works together. The idea of an emulator is sanity checks to make sure just basic code is working right. It's a sanity check to quickly go, okay, and was watching the demo where you were showing the Redis, things like that. Everything, and what y'all are doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm making some assumptions here, but you're basically you're doing root level functionality. Regardless of where you are, this is how this should function.
Exactly.
Whether you're on AWS, Azure, Google, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And so and that's, see, to me, I think that's the perfect use of an emulator, right? So you throw that in there, and then when I'm ready to test the cloud specific and get into the, is the auth right? Are these settings right? Then I need to get to the cloud as quick as I can. Yeah. Right. And so that's and that's one I would ask you this question. Are y'all looking at doing a quick update of any sort?
On the cloud?
Yeah. So if I build, are you looking at doing like a SAM sync idea or a CDK sync? Okay.
By the way, how is it called in the CDK? It's called something else.
I don't know. I can't spell CDK. That's not true. I use the CDK.
Anecdotally, we actually had a pretty big discussion between the CDK team and the SAM team when we both released this feature, and the SAM team wanted to call it sync. Okay. And we were like, it doesn't, the mental model doesn't make sense for the CDK. And so eventually we called it
it's a different
hot reloading
name.
or something like that, or
hot load or something like that.
Yeah. That was an interesting, but it was also interesting to see like how these two teams were basically getting to the point where they need to like implement this feature at the same time, and the Amazon situation where there's, but so to your, I haven't answered your question because the answer is no. We're not going to support that.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
And I would even say that I wouldn't call our local simulator an emulator, because in a way an emulator. I think it's an implementation of the portable cloud, basically. I mean, so one implementation of the portable cloud is AWS. I mean, we have an adapter, basically, kind of we have an adapter between AWS to our portable cloud, because we have a bucket, we have API gateway, we have PubSub or topics. Lambda, Q, we're going to have, you mentioned Fargate, we're going to have some ways to run containers. And now we need to implement this for all the cloud providers. One of them is
the local machine. and it's not even a simulator in a
Right.
sense, right? Like
Right.
it's literally a local implementation of your application.
Yeah.
And the reason it makes sense in the architecture of Wing is that the code that you're writing it against that layer. You're not writing it against
Yes.
the AWS API.
Right.
So
Right,
contrary to amazing solutions like LocalStack, for
Yep.
example,
Exactly.
which is attempting to completely mimic the AWS
Right.
implementation in the local environment, we don't have that need because, like you said, you have a functional unit called a bucket, and it has a specific function in your application. And it has a contract with your application. So you can get a file, put a file, list the files, right? Like there's a bunch of APIs that it supports. And as long as I'm implementing that contract, it's a bucket as far as you're concerned, right? Like you don't care if it's a Dropbox bucket or an S3 bucket or a local file system.
Yeah.
And that's a big challenge. We know that it's a...
I wanted to say that the other side of the coin is it basically relies on the fact that we will be able to kind of provide an abstraction that will be able to that will work.
It will carry over.
It will carry over. I mean, that's the other side of the coin. I mean, we need to prove basically. I mean, that people will be able to write software that uses this abstraction. And it's not going to fail. Yeah. That's because we haven't done this yet. It's not proven, and that's the other side. I mean, the fact that an Azure bucket and a GCP bucket and an S3 bucket, the fact we're saying that they all behave the same, that's easy. Function, okay, that's easy. A queue, now there's FIFO, and there's complexity there.
And by the way, I have to say that the value proposition, and I know that you're kind of cringing a little bit, the value proposition of like porting your cloud application across providers is actually not one of the primary things that we're trying to solve.
I understand.
Like for us, it's almost a side effect of the simulator requirement, right?
Yeah.
Like because for me, this is the irresistible thing, right? Like the ability to actually iterate locally on my full cloud application with millisecond iteration cycle is something that I won't be able to go back from.
Bringing back the flow.
And go back to this flow that you've been talking about, right?
So where do you... This quickly turned into me interviewing you. All right, there it is. Sorry. Just kidding. So how do you draw the line then and yeah, there's obviously similarities, but there are differences. How do you draw the line in your simulator? I'm willing to call it that. Your C emulator. No, I'm just kidding. Your simulator. Philosophically or what's your methodology? I'm trying to use words that I never use. There they are. How do you decide we don't need to support that locally? That can be tested in the cloud. And is there a line?
Yeah.
Is it, well, we just haven't gotten to it yet, or is there a philosophy about no? That can be tested in the cloud. That's a very specific idea.
A classic example for me is Kinesis. Kinesis. Sorry. I mean, I'm not that familiar with the kind of the API, the technology, but I kind of feel like we're not going to be able to basically, create an abstraction on top of it that will run on all the clouds and run the simulator, and then we're going to provide. It's not going to be part of kind of the cloud kind of namespace. You'll be able to use it, of course. There will be different kind of emulators. Or for Kinesis on your local host, and maybe we're going to proxy the events to. I mean, we're going to proxy kind of the API calls to Kinesis running on the cloud. But there's some things that are just kind of unique. I mean, BigQuery is unique. There's a lot of unique stuff on the cloud. And I think that's where the line is going to be drawn in many cases.
Yeah, I thought that Eric's question was about, let's say, a bucket.
The API of a bucket. Right. Okay, interesting.
I mean, this is also interesting.
Okay.
But
that's service level. So I like that.
What Eyal was basically saying, and I think it's not clear.
I don't think you say his name right, but
I think it's not clear from what we've been talking about is that you could actually use any cloud resource in Wing.
Right.
And so if you want to use Kinesis or if you want to use AWS RoboMaker in your application, then you can just import the AWS RoboMaker provider and do new AWS RoboMaker. And when you compile this to AWS, it'll have an AWS RoboMaker resource and you can interact with it and you can do whatever you want with it. And we will also give you a way to provide the local implementation for this RoboMaker.
Either mocking or proxy.
Through mocking or through proxying to the real cloud. Okay. And you could publish it as a library. And so I could publish a library called Wing RoboMaker.
Right.
And the Wing RoboMaker library would have both the AWS implementation and the local implementation. And then people can use it, for their own purposes.
That's pretty slick.
And so that's what Eyal was saying, about the surface area.
Okay,
like
gotcha.
we're not stupid to think that you could build everything with 20 resources, right? Like the whole beauty of the cloud is its diversity and richness and choice, and Wing is designed to support that.
Right.
So that's I think that's one aspect, and we're still, early in exploring that developer experience exactly, and
right.
But to your question, Eric, about which capabilities of a bucket we're exposing as part of the cloud API, and which ones are actually cloud specific, provider specific, let's call it. The litmus test that we're using is functional versus non-functional. It's like, is this something that an application developer, does this impact the functionality of the application? And so the canonic example is encryption, right? Encryption.
Sure. Yeah.
The application doesn't give a fuck if something is encrypted or not, right? Like it's just, just put the file here. Right? But then when you go and you deploy it to a cloud provider, then you care if it's encrypted, right? Because you have some regulatory requirements, because you have some policies, right? Whatever, right? This is fun when you're not in AWS. You can say whatever you want on Twitch.
Yeah, well, that's exactly. Like, whoa, hey, oh no, wait, I'm not on your screen. Okay.
I saw your face. I saw your face. And so this is the litmus test we're using. Nice. We're not sure exactly how much water it'll hold over time. Yeah. But the other important aspect of it is, and I think we mentioned it in your show, but I'm not sure, is what we call Wing plugins.
Right.
And Wing plugins are basically things that you can connect to your compiler and apply target-specific customizations below the abstraction.
Right.
And that's happening based on the specific provider that you're targeting. And so if I'm compiling to AWS, I can create a plugin that makes sure that all the buckets are encrypted.
Exactly.
Or that applies HIPAA compliance across my entire application. So the idea is that you can actually control both sides of the abstraction. One side is the application, the other side is the infrastructure, the non-functional aspects.
It's a lot about the separation of concerns. These are two different concerns, and we don't want. A lot of times operations or DevOps and engineers, and or software developers, and we don't want the software developer to be blocked by the DevOps, and we don't want the DevOps people that are doing this to be blocked. So it's two different things. So I'm writing the fact that I need to write into a bucket, read from a bucket, and someone else makes sure that this bucket is versioned and there's backups and it's multiple regions. It's two different things, and these are the policies.
Yeah. Which, by the way, Eric, I think is a bit of somewhat of a blind spot for AWS. In hindsight, maybe from outside, I can see it a little bit because, when you work at AWS, everybody's doing everything, right? Like an engineer, an SDE, it owns the entire stack, right? They own the application and they own the VPC.
That's the two pizza team, right?
The two pizza team, the full stack mentality, which, as
full ownership.
For me, it was obviously the right place. But if you look at the industry, you look at like financial institutions, you look at application developers, that's not the natural, division, right? Like they definitely hit. And I think AWS is struggling somewhat to like apply these models across the industry. And there's a bit of we feel that Wing could be a good way for companies that don't have that mentality to adopt the cloud and leverage it way more effectively than they're doing today. Because today the reality is that they're shoving their application developers to the corner, right? Like they're telling them, okay, put your code over here in this repository. And we'll deploy it to your Lambda function or to your container, and we'll take care of everything. And so they're not really leveraging the cloud, right? Like they're giving up on the cloud in a sense, right?
Yeah. Well, and I would say that what you're saying is valid. What we see is you're talking to companies, not necessarily AWS, but you're talking to companies that are trying to do governance.
Totally.
A lot of times, and I've sat with FinOp companies. Specifically FinOp, in the banking, where you're right. It is. Look, you write a little bit of code, and we'll put it in the Lambda for you. We'll put it in the Lambda function. Sorry, Chris Munns, and we'll do whatever. Or you can't use this service, or you can use this features of this service, that kind of stuff. And I agree with you, and you're right. Companies need help understanding how to do that. While we have some tools in place, obviously the tools you have will make use of those tools also.
Of course, that's what I was saying earlier.
So no, and I think that's brilliant. If you got all your customers, see, that's the other thing we see in a lot of companies. And I remember when I first came to Rackspace, it was like this. It was like, well, I have this idea, I'm going to build this. What language, what framework stuff do I have to use? Just use whatever. What?
Really?
What? And I get that from a developer standpoint. It's like, all right, I'll use my favorite language, And so, but from a governance standpoint, that becomes language, maybe not as much, although that's an issue. But architecture and pre-built blocks, that becomes a nightmare. So I can definitely see an advantage of this, and it being very powerful.
Yeah. But also languages, kind of pipelines. I mean, all of this kind of eventually gets. I mean, companies want to consolidate these things because that's it's a real issue. I think we're kind of running out of time. I think it's kind of moved really, really fast.
All right.
Yeah, I think. I mean,
I have a lot more to say, but okay.
I'm too. I mean, I kind of feel like
you again. Of course.
I kind of feel like
I love it.
This show has kind of a tradition that there's one item that we never touch in the. There's always one item that we never
get to,
and we're not going to get to the last item.
What was the last item?
We want to go with Shai on the Q&A on the Reddit. We have a nice.
Sorry, Shai.
Yeah, sorry, Shai.
There was a pretty heated Reddit thread on Wing this week, so we were thinking it would be cool to go over it and answer some questions and try to explain why the fuck do you think new programming language is the right solution to these problems.
Maybe we should record TikTok videos on this.
Well, go watch my show. This isn't a shameless plug, although it is. But the show I asked you that. We talked about that a little bit on the why, because that is a good question. Why do the other language?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I know when y'all are off air, you can be like Eric would never shut up, Shai. So he's the reason we couldn't come on, and that's fair. If you want to do that, it's totally fine.
Exactly.
Throw me into the bus.
I mean,
wouldn't be the first time. So, all right, I have one more question. If you have a second,
we do.
So, when do you think? And this is it's an abstract. When do you think Wing will be usable in like a beta
level
environment? Yeah,
do you have a suspicion that there are bugs in Wing that won't let you use?
I have. Let's talk about my first bug. I mean, I have fixed a bug for you all. If you remember, I submitted a PR and did the whole thing, and I fixed some spelling issues on the. You
also discovered a bunch. You also ran into like two blocking issues.
I did just the other day. Yeah, I was trying it out. I was revisiting. What I do is I go in and come back periodically to see how far along it is. And when I heard the API coming out, and I know we can't talk about, but time-wise, you can just tell me to shut up. But I was super excited to see the API implementation. That's obviously a big one. API. Yeah. How do we get to it? How do we use this? An API is a huge one. Did y'all fix the C emulator problem?
Yeah, of course.
It's fixed.
All right, good. Okay, of course.
Now the next time it's going to be a whole new bug.
We actually Shai was posting on our Slack is like a P0 bug. You know what a P it's a Sev2. It's like an AWS Sev2 event. It's like all hands on deck.
Yeah.
Reverting all the PRs.
The next one.
Eric Johnson, baby,
exactly.
right there.
You're
It
not
wasn't
gonna,
because of you, by the way. It wasn't because of you. It was
No,
just
no,
like,
no, but I called it out.
yeah, you
I'm
called
taking
it out.
credit.
Totally,
I'm
totally,
proud of
totally,
that. Yeah.
totally.
so the next time it's going to be a whole new
The
bunch.
right channels.
So, well, to your
What's
to-
that?
So, to your question about beta,
Yeah. Yeah.
we don't know exactly, and you know how it works with software. You know, it's ready when it's ready, and it takes time to kind of bake. There's this aspect of like organic baking. We are intentionally trying to stop developing features,
Right.
and move towards like quality, stability,
Right.
performance.
Right.
So we are definitely like interested in releasing beta
Right.
soon, right?
Yeah.
As soon as we can. We think that from a surface area perspective, there's like enough to kind of like show what we're trying to do and like kind of, you know, sketch the boundaries of and capabilities of what Wing is able to do.
CMVP, yeah.
But I think that, you know, before it's like stable enough and performant and feels like it's a, you know, a solid piece of engineering, it won't be ready. But, you know, as I said, we're actually like intentionally trying to like shift gears.
Right.
And
Right. We're exactly right now in the shifting gear where we said this is the content is I don't want to repeat a lot. I mean, we're freezing the content and now we're making sure that the quality is solid, and the first time user experience for people that are onboarding Wing will be kind of delightful. So that's that. And once we get to a point where we're saying this is good enough, then we're gonna say it's beta time, and
we'll call you. We'll call you.
We'll call
again.
you.
And also, of course,
Oh, I'm following along. I'm following along.
continue
Yeah,
to
yeah.
yell,
I'm
to yell anytime you see something at any level. By the way, on the website, on the docs,
Okay.
on the on social. You know,
Yeah.
we're
Definitely.
still kind of alpha in every aspect of
in
the.
every aspect we are.
Here's my one piece of feedback,
Go ahead.
and then I'll shut up. Is documentation, things like that. Your documentation is really well thought out, read out, but it's kind of shoots at people smarter than me.
Okay.
There are words in
interesting.
it. It's like I don't know what that means.
Oh, this is a good
And
feedback.
so I'm a pretty average developer, so I would really encourage you to more
Interesting.
examples.
Yeah.
Okay.
I learned by looking, going, oh, okay, that's how that code works,
Nice.
and things like that. And then I go look up the words I don't understand, you know, things like that. But I would really encourage you to write to not change what you've got, but add to it
Got
in a
it.
way that.
Awesome.
So all right, now that we've gone through all the here's the principle and everything behind it. Here's an example of what we mean.
Awesome.
And that's how I learn like crazy.
Yeah.
Everything I've
That's
learned
awesome,
is just
awesome
by
That's
feedback.
great
doing it.
feedback.
So
That's
yeah.
great feedback. So Elad needs
that
to
would be my
stop writing
feedback.
the documentation. He's just too smart to write documentation. That's
I'm not too
Yeah,
smart, I'm
it's
just like
like-
too falsan.
philosophical. Yeah. Okay, Eric.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much.
thank you for joining.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
having me.
for your
Appreciate
time
it,
here,
gentlemen.
and thank you for people watching and for this show, and
Yeah.
we'll see you in 2 weeks, right? Bye, Ringley.